Welcome to The Dying Breed. I'm Caleb, and I'm here with Dave Rustebakke. He's our local vet. He's been in vet medicine for 50 plus years, and we're going to talk about some of the things that he's seen in 50 plus years of vet medicine and I mean all the craziness that goes right with that.
There's a lot of craziness that goes with it.
So let's start out where were you born?
In Scobie, Montana, which is in the far northeast corner of Montana. It's in a part of the country nobody really wants to live. It is called it's actually a bunch of years ago, a bunch of sociologists, geographers, and so on got together and decided to figure out where the middle of nowhere was. And guess where it was?
That's where it was.
Where I grew up is where the middle of nowhere is.
How cold was it in the winter there?
You know, back then it's not as cold now as it used to be, but it wasn't unusual to get a week of 40 below zero weather.
Wow.
And I remember that a day that warmed up to zero was a warm day.
Wow!
If it was zero, it was a pretty nice warm day.
So you ranch?
This is in the winter time. Yeah, my dad had a farm and a ranch, a small farm and a ranch. We had about 2,000 acres, which doesn't sound small to some people, but back there, that was really a starvation farm.
Oh, really?
It was.
Well, it's probably. Is it similar to here that you have to have a lot of acres to run a few cows?
Right. You know, back there you needed about 15 or 20 acres per cow, and our place was split up. About half of it was in cropland, and the other half was in pasture.
Wow.
So
what earliest memory growing up there?
My earliest memory, well, I remember when the REA, the Rural Electrification Association, came in, and they put a big old power pole in our yard, strung wires to our house, and all of a sudden we had electricity.
Really? How old were you?
And that would have been in about 1952 or 53. Wow. I was 4 or 5 years old. Before that, we didn't have electricity.
Wow!
And so it was pretty far out in the middle of nowhere.
Wow!
And
it's crazy. We were talking before we got started about how my generation and the generations coming up really don't understand.
Right. About 4 or 5 years after that, actually, I think it was in the late 1950s, we got telephone.
Oh, really? Okay.
And that was really cool. You know,
was it a party line?
It was a party line, and just the thought of sitting there and being able to talk to somebody that wasn't in our same house it just blew me away.
And for everyone out there that's my generation or younger, a party line, it was when you rang up, when you wanted to talk to someone else. If someone else on that line was talking, you couldn't.
Right. You'd pick up the phone, and if somebody else, there was about 7 or 8 families that would be on the party line. And if somebody else was on there, you wouldn't get a dial tone, but you could listen in on them.
Get all the local gossip.
Which was a little crazy. Yeah. But when you picked it up, there was a click in the line, and people knew that there was somebody listening. So they kind of, but anyway, that's just the way it was back then.
So you grew up ranching, riding. What made you want to start being a vet?
Well, I always wanted to be a farmer. I loved the farm. I loved the cattle. And as time went on, I realized that we really did have a starvation farm. I mean, we just were barely able to put food on the table. But we always had food on the table because we had a big garden and we had a herd of cattle. So we always had food on the table, but there wasn't a lot of extra stuff. And I realized that was not a very good career choice. And so I was fortunate enough to get to go to college. And when I was in college, I figured out that I did have other options. I didn't have to do that. I still kind of envy those that had big enough farms that they were able to stay back there, because it's a really great lifestyle if you can afford it.
It's kind of great because I mean, my dad we were never quote unquote poor, but we weren't high middle class per se, and it was always amazing to me that the people that had the big spreads, they actually could make a living doing it, didn't appreciate it. You know, especially the young ones like my age, they, you know, kind of piss it all away.
One thing that was kind of interesting when I look back at it is I never thought we were poor. We couldn't afford anything, but I never really thought we were poor. In fact, I actually felt sorry for the town kids, the bankers' kids, the insurance guys' kids, the lawyers' kids, because they didn't have all the room to run around in, and and they all loved to come out to the farm and hang out with me and my family, because we had a lot of things that they didn't have, and in town there they did have TV and they had all that stuff. We didn't have television until I think I was about a junior in college. That would have been in about 1968 or 69 is when my parents got television. Television was available before that, but they just didn't feel they could afford it, and they really had no desire to even have it.
Well, and the televisions of the time, again, when I was a kid, we had an old television, and the damn thing weighed, I think, 50 pounds. I mean, it was about as
they were black and white, and you always had to be adjusting the antenna to try to get a decent signal. And
the screen was what, 6 inches?
Yeah.
And now we got 70-inch TVs. I'm always amazed.
Right. It's way different. Yeah.
And then, so you were in the military as well. Is that how you went to college, or how did that transpire?
Well, my dad was served in World War II, and he was in the 2nd Rangers. He was deployed on D-Day on Normandy Beach, and his Army career got cut pretty short because he got shot right on the beach when he just stepped off the landing craft and got shot. And it was probably a good thing. It didn't kill him naturally, of course. So, but anyway, I always admired that, and back there in that place and in that time, military people were really held at a high regard, and I was always, one of my goals was to become someday part of the military. And when I was in veterinary school, in my freshman year, a recruiter came by. Vietnam was underway, and this would have been in 1968, right in the middle of the Vietnam War. And I had thought about just joining, but I got accepted into veterinary school, and I really wanted to finish that. And so the recruiter came by and presented an offer that I thought was pretty good. It would allow me to become a part of the Army, and it would also allow me to finish vet school. It was called the Early Commissioning Program, and if I signed up, they would guarantee that I would get to finish vet school before I had to go. I had a low draft number, 55 was my draft number, and as it turned out, they never did draft people out of veterinary school, but we didn't know that at the time.
Recruiter didn't tell you that either.
And so I thought that was a pretty good deal. I went ahead and signed up for that. And so when I got out of vet school, I owed them a 2-year commitment. When I was a senior, they upped the ante and said that if I would sign up for 3 years, they would pay me as a second lieutenant my last year of school. And that ended up about $500 or $600 a month, was to me was absolute a fortune at that time. And so I jumped right on that.
So then you went after vet school. You did 3 years,
right? I had a 3-year commitment. Right.
And what did they have you doing?
What I did was they assigned me to a medical laboratory, a veterinary laboratory at Brooke Army Medical Center in Fort Sam Houston, Texas.
Oh, really?
So I spent most of my career right there in San Antonio.
Oh, wow.
And that's where I met my wife, Karen.
Really?
She worked at the lab that I was at. So
wow, I didn't know that. I did not know that, and I've known you for.
Yeah, well, you never asked.
I know. That's why I love doing this. Honestly.
Yeah.
So then how did what you got out of it? You went through college. You got to here. How did you end up practicing veterinary medicine in
Lewiston, Idaho? Yeah. Well, when I got out of the service, there's a little more to it.
Okay.
They really wanted me to stay in the service. They put a lot into training, and there weren't a lot of people that did what I did, and so they promised that if I re-upped, that I could have my choice of either going to Germany or to Hawaii.
Oh, really?
And I thought about that, and I thought about it, and I thought, no, I didn't go to vet school to sit on my butt and do what I'm doing here, pushing paper. I went in to get all bloody and covered in cow poop. So I said, no, I'm going to go. I want to get out and go into practice. And so that's what I did.
Oh. Yeah. And so you went, so where did you start your practice?
My first, well, when I got out, I didn't have a job yet. And so I started answering ads in the AVMA Journal, American Vet Medical Association, had classified ads. And I answered some. I actually could have stayed there in San Antonio, and my wife wanted me to stay in San Antonio because that's where she was from. But I really wanted to get out of there and go.
That's hot. Do some. I don't know if it's hot down there,
right? It's miserable. If you're in small animal, you're in an air conditioned room, right. but large animal, you're out in that heat, and it was pretty hot and pretty sticky down there. And so I started applying different places, and I'd been to California before, and it kind of appealed to me.
Right.
And I answered an ad for a practice in Morgan Hill, California, a small town south of San Jose. And also I wanted to go someplace that had a pretty good equine program, right, where I could get some good mentorship in equine medicine and surgery. And so I ended up taking that job, and I spent about 3.5 years there in Morgan Hill, California, Valley Large Animal Hospital, and it was a wonderful experience. But after 3.5 years of being in, it wasn't very rural there.
Pretty high end type horses. Things like
that. It was suburban.
Right.
Morgan Hill was kind of a suburb of San Jose, and it was a lot of 5-acre tracts with a backyard horse, and we did have just over the hill from there, out of the Santa Clara Valley, right over the hill, were some big ranches, and we did work for them too, and that was kind of like being back in Montana when I got a call back there. But overall, we decided that California was not where we wanted to spend the rest of our life, and so we decided to move on.
And is that when you came up here then? Right.
I decided I'd like to get back up into the Northwest. And I didn't really want to go back to eastern Montana because I had had enough of 40 below zero weather. And I went to school at Washington State, so I was familiar with the area. And for people that are in the Palouse area, it's not exactly warm here in the winter, but compared to where I was from, it was. So,
regular heat wave.
Yeah, it was like a heat wave compared to Montana. And so anyway, a job came open in Lewiston, Idaho, and I came
Was that
up
with
and-
that was with Lewiston
with
Vet?
the Lewiston Veterinary
Yeah.
Clinic. It was called the McIntosh Clinic at the time.
Okay.
Dr. McIntosh is the guy that started the clinic, and he had just retired, and they needed to. They're looking for somebody else.
What year was this?
This would have been in 1979.
Oh wow.
In 1979, right?
And you taught for a while at Wazoo too, didn't you?
No, I
okay.
never did teach.
Oh, okay.
No.
I thought for some reason somebody mentioned that.
No, but I did. Well, that's for down the line. I ended up putting. I worked there for approximately, from 79 to 2000.
Okay.
20.
Oh, wow.
20.
Wow.
So I was there for 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So obviously, a lot of people don't understand large animal medicine, and they don't understand it's not as clean as small animal. A lot of people have pets. They go in, they drop their pet off in a nice air conditioned office, and it goes back to just like a people doctor. Basically, you take him back, and he's got
It's
a little.
pretty much the same as human medicine.
Yeah. And but large animal is a lot more unpredictable.
Very unpredictable. The animals that are hauled into the clinic, it's a little bit more predictable because we have facilities to handle most anything. But on farm calls, you never know what you're going to get into.
What did I've heard? Well, I've worked with you on some crazy stories, and I've heard some crazy stories. But what was one of the moment you were like, holy crap, I don't know if I want to be a vet anymore? What was that moment for you in your career?
Well, I don't know if I could say a specific moment that happened, but there are just so many occasions when just everything comes unraveled. Actually, a recent one was the last cow call that I had this spring. I walked up to and this is pretty typical. I mean, this wasn't the first time it had happened, but I had a cow that was calving out in the middle of a field, and so I walk up to her, and of course she's going to run off, and there's no facilities there, so we've just got my pickup and the owner's pickup, and the two of us are there and a cow, and so I walk up to her, and it was obvious that she was going to get up and run off, so I went and got my rope, and I was going to throw a rope on her. And after I got it thrown on her, my plan was to quick snub her to the trailer hitch. Well, I got close enough to throw the rope on her, and she jumps up and charged me.
Oh, gee.
And ran me over. I get up, and she ran me over again, wallered me around, and I ended up screwing up both of my shoulders. Ended up getting rotator cuff tears and anyway, that's an example of the kind of thing that can happen.
The first time I met you, we were out at old Johnny Yearout's place, and I think I was 18.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw you, I thought, who's that young kid? And it didn't take long, and I saw that young kid. Actually, Caleb, you kind of reminded of me when I was 18. And I kind of took a liking to old Caleb right there, because he was just jumping in and doing stuff. And
had no idea what I was doing, but I was trying real hard.
Well, you'd been working for John for a while, so you kind of knew what he had.
His horses were plumb wild too.
These are a bunch of we were castrating horses. These were like yearling, well, mostly 2-year-olds.
Yeah,
I think.
John never got them on the yearling.
Yearlings and 2-year-olds, and we were running them into a little enclosure and then trying to stick a needle in them and get them in drugs in them so that we could get them anesthetized so we could work on them. And they get out and they break through the restraints, and
that pen wasn't very good either.
It was
pretty
good.
rough.
It wasn't very good.
I remember I think I don't think it was first year that you and I were doing that, but we were definitely doing it. And you shut, because you were giving them a 2-part solution, I think it was. I don't know.
Yeah, we give them a sedative, a heavy sedative, and then follow that up with anesthetic.
Right. So you know, and the way you kind of had to be quick, you know, or you were dead, because those things would paw and they'd come right down on top of you.
Right.
You know, and they'd jump they'd jump, you know.
Yeah.
And I thought you'd gotten the second. I don't know what was going on in my head, but I thought you'd gotten that second drug in him, and I kicked him out because they go down pretty quick. You know, they come out of the pen and then they kind of stagger along for a minute, and then they fall over, and we give them the rest and do the whole thing, do the whole process.
Right.
But I didn't realize you hadn't gotten the second one, and I turned him out. And you're like, no, I didn't get him. And I tried to stop him. I really did.
You were hanging on to his head, and you were going for a ride.
I went all the way across that pen.
Yeah. But I was pretty impressed. You hung on. You hung on.
I never know when to let go.
Yeah, right.
What if with vet medicine, and again, it's funny because I've seen you do it. I've talked to you when you're doing it. And it's very different. It's a different today, and not that it's bad. It's just different. But I've seen you go out on calls at midnight. And I don't, old school vets, I mean, you know, if you got a call, you just went, especially in large animal, you know, a horse would be colicking or a cow would be down, you know, and I've talked to you, like it's 7:00 and you're headed to Timbuktu to go rescue some horse or some cow or some donkey,
or at 1 a.m. or 3 a.m. or whatever. Yeah.
And working in the this is the other thing is you work in environments where you kind of got to make do. Like that's what I've noticed. Like roping a cow, hitching him to the bumper of your truck. You know, I mean, I've done that on occasion with not quite the same thing, but with horses, I had one. I hooked him he was kicking like a son of a gun, and I didn't, you know, we don't have drugs or nothing. So I hooked his back leg to the front of my truck and his front to the front of the guy's truck. And he was rocking both trucks as he was kicking.
You do what you got to do. I've done C-sections on cows out tied to a bush out in the middle of a pasture.
Oh,
you know, it's
so weird because people view it as like, you know, they think of the sterile, clean, and you're saving these animals' life. I mean, they're not going to make it, but it's not clean. It's not sterile. It's very nitty gritty. Get it done.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, and it's such a change. I really don't think people understand how much the rancher and then the people that support the ranchers and how much they go through to save their animals, how much time and energy they put in.
It's hard for people that are growing up in the city or in a non-agricultural environment, which is most of the people now. Back in the 1950s when I grew up, I don't know what, there were probably 50% of the population they were either on farms or they were in small towns that depended on agriculture for their livelihood. And now it's like 5% of the population. And even the ones now are things have gotten so mechanized that it's not quite the same as it was back then.
Well, and you talked about it earlier. You talked about, you know, you never viewed yourself as poor, but you had a big garden. You always had food on the table. And I mean, we were that way too, not the same, but we were similar. We didn't eat a lot of food from the grocery store. We ate out of the garden. We grew potatoes and corn.
Right.
And we hunted, you know.
Yeah.
And I never viewed our lifestyle as being poor. And it wasn't until I got older and I was like, oh, we didn't have a lot to go around sometimes, but We didn't know any better.
Right. Right. Your parents pretty good at hiding that from the kids.
Yeah.
They worry about that stuff, but we don't have to worry about it too much when
well,
you're a
and
kid.
raising, I had my, I told you I just had my first son, and I don't necessarily want him to go through the same hardships that I did, but I'd like him to experience some of it. I think in my generation especially, we've missed. We don't have that appreciation,
Well, I think that we see that in, the demographics of the veterinary profession have just changed 100% since I first got in it, 50 years ago. Most of us, well, in my class of 50 at WSU, in 1968, there were 50 of us in the class. There were 5 women, 45 guys. And of the guys, of all of us, most of us had come from farms and ranches or small towns that were supporting the farms and ranches, and very few came from urban areas. And now it's rare to find a ranch kid or farm kid in vet school. And when you grow up in an urban environment, your parents are probably work an 8-to-5 job. You have weekends off, and typical middle class family. You don't work on weekends and you don't work after 5 o'clock. So these kids come into school, and that's the world they've known.
Right.
Whereas in my generation, when the sun is up and there's work to be done, you're out working.
Right.
That's the way it is on a farm. We tried to take Sundays off, but that was it. And even on Sunday, you still got to milk the cows and feed the cows, and there's all kinds of chores to do on Sunday too. And so it's just kind of the way we were raised. And if a cow is having a calf and needs to be checked. We always took turns checking cows during calving season.
Right.
We'd get up and check them in the middle of the night, and that's just kind of what we did. And so for me and for my generation of veterinarians, it was kind of the way.
You didn't know any different.
We didn't really know any different, and it was okay. And I'm not saying it's good or it's bad or whatever. It's just the way it was. And now with the demographic, the people that are coming into veterinary school now, with the background they have, it's not just ingrained in them that it's okay to be there all night.
Right. Well, so. It's crazy because, and I see this a little bit in my industry, and my wife isn't from a ranching, farming background. Yeah. So I had the one that ended up at the vet clinic the other day. She called me. She goes, "Hey, the horse is lame. I don't know what to do." And I was like, I can't remember. It was a day off. I was with the wife, and I said, "Hey, baby, I got to take you home." She goes, "He can wait." I said, No, I got to go. I got to. Mm-hmm. I can't leave it. Just mentally,
right?
It would eat at me,
right?
And in the winter, I get up, especially in the really super cold, when we get those cold snaps, I get up midnight, 1 a.m, and I'll go down and check everybody at the barn, right. And I'll feed them again, give them a little extra food, just because that really, basically, I think isn't the coldest part of the night, from like that 4 o'clock to like 7 o'clock is the coldest it's going to be, is right then.
Right.
And so I like to give them a little food, kind of, and your animals, for me, like I mean, people, I like people well enough, but I really like animals.
Right.
They're good. People are nice, but animals, especially, they can't tell you where they're hurt.
That's right. Yeah, they just kind of get a special place in your heart because of that, just because they're so vulnerable and they're so dependent on you.
Right. And I don't think, all the Mustangs, people, I get a lot of comments on some videos like, well, what about the Mustang? I'm like, you realize that the Mustangs don't survive as long. So like animals that are under the care of of humans survive longer.
They have a lot better quality of life.
Well, and you've been in. I mean, you do the floating, the teeth floating, all of the things that you do, the maintenance that we do for animals.
Right.
But what would you say is probably the craziest vet story? Like, what if you could look back and go, man, that was a crazy story? What?
There's been so many it would be hard to pick out one.
You've died once.
I what?
Didn't you? I think it was somebody had to do CPR on you because you got kicked and.
Oh, that was I didn't. They didn't have to do CPR on me, but I did get kicked and knocked out cold.
Yeah,
yeah.
I heard it was a little more. The vet tech that was with you was pretty freaked out after that.
Well, you never know. You never know. Yeah. Well, you know how it is. If you ever see anybody get hurt, it hurts.
Oh, yeah.
It hurts the spectators more than it hurts the person that actually got whacked.
I bet you're laying on the ground, don't have a clue what's going on.
Yeah, right. I wasn't there. I was some other place when that happened. So,
I think,
but I've had a few close calls. I've had. I've got a guardian angel that's been pretty busy to keep me alive this long. I've had horses that have almost kicked me. Really though, I've not had serious injuries.
What happened with? Because I was on. I think it was the first year. We've gone on the Chief Joe ride for everyone that's listening. So the Chief Joseph Trail Ride is a commemorative ride that takes 13 years to complete, and you go from Joseph, Oregon, all the way to Bear Paw, Montana.
Right.
And you follow the trail that the Nez Perce took when they were running away from the cavalry.
Right.
And you've done that. You've done the 13 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You've done the whole ride.
Right. That was the Nez Perce War of 1877.
And you've made the whole trip.
Right.
And you were the vet.
Right. I was the vet. I was the vet for it for about 17 or 18 years.
Wow. But one year, the first year that I went, you couldn't go because you were in a back brace, as I recall.
That was was that in 2017?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
Well, in 2011, I was helping a friend with a horse, and the horse reared over backwards, and I ended up underneath the horse, and I broke my back. Oh, and so I had to have surgery to stabilize my spine at that point. And this was in 2011. So 6 years later, in 2017, the next vertebrae up above, the one they'd fixed, went bad on me, and I had to have it fixed.
Oh, geez.
Okay. So that's what happened there.
Because I knew something. It's funny because I hear stories because a lot of the people that I've shod for, you've gone, I've gotten the job because you called them,
Yeah.
And it was always, especially when I started, it was a lot of responsibility because I always looked up to you, like you were a role model for me, and I didn't want to let you down. And back then and to this day, it seems like the more I learn, the less I know. That's
the same in vet medicine. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And I'm one of there aren't a lot of veterinarians that have much of an interest in farriery. And before I got into vet school, I got exposed to shoeing horses. Back in eastern Montana, we really didn't need to shoe horses because it was nice, soft sod, and unless you were going to be riding in some really rocky country, you didn't need.
Right.
You didn't need, so nobody shod their horses. We trimmed them, and I taught myself how to trim at an early age, and so I did all my own trimming. But when I was between my junior and senior year of veterinary school, I went and worked for a veterinarian in Conrad, Montana, by the name of Rib Gustafson. And
that Wiley Gustafson?
That's Wiley's dad.
He was a vet?
his dad was.
Really? No kidding.
Yeah, Wiley's dad was a veterinarian, and there were 5 kids in the family, and his brother Bar and his brother Sid are also veterinarians.
Really?
So Rib had 5 kids, and 2 of them are veterinarians, 2 of them are musicians, and 1 of them is an attorney.
Boy, he got the whole gambit.
He did, right.
He got one of everything.
He did, yep. It was a great family. I really enjoyed that.
Wiley's one of the best yodelers I think I've ever heard.
He is. He was a world champion yodeler. Yeah. But he was about 10 or 11 years old when I was there that summer. So
wow. And that's where you got your exposure.
But anyway, Rib, in addition to being a veterinarian, he was a rancher. He ran about 800 head of yearlings and 200 head of mother cows, and he had a ranch leased from the Blackfoot Indians up out of Browning, Montana, between Browning and East Glacier. And so we spent a lot of time up there riding. So he had a bunch of horses. It took a lot of horses to check on the cattle. Plus he just liked horses. He liked raising horses. But anyway, one day he takes me out and he says, "I want you to watch me here." So he shod one horse. I can't remember if he shod the whole horse or 1 foot on that horse. And he said, "I want you to watch what I'm doing here." And then when he got done, he handed me the tools and pointed to there was about 7 or 8 more horses in the pen. He says, "The rest of them are yours. Have at it." And so I kind of, between him, I kind of learned how to shoe. Oh. And I could have killed him at the time, but I thanked him many times since.
Get you a refill
for getting me started on that. And I shod horses for years. I never was a professional farrier the way you are, but I've always shod my own and occasionally shoe for somebody else.
Well, I started, that's pretty much, that's kind of how I started, because I was with John Uraut, and I think I got the same lecture and lesson, because John he showed me how to do one, and
I said, have at it.
And I'm not going to say that I did it well for a long time.
Well, I didn't do it well either, and even after doing what I've done for all those years, I'm not up to what you're doing right now.
It's crazy. I feel like I'm back in school because I went and got involved with the AFA Association, the American Farrier Association, and it's kind of crazy. I didn't realize until I got involved with it. Every one of the testers and examiners for that association are volunteers. Mm-hmm. They just volunteer to kind of pass on what they know to the next generation of horseshoers. And it has been amazing for me to be around peers and have the ability to ask questions. It's hard, especially like here, practicing medicine in the valley here. Sometimes you're out in the middle of something and you're in the middle of nowhere with no cell service, looking at something going, I don't know what to do here. Like, what do I do here? And it's nice to have somebody to call and go, get back to the house.
Well, that's one thing in our profession. We do have people to call.
In the vet.
Right. And we're fortunate here is that, I've got a really good working relationship with many of the veterinarians at Washington State University, and I've got friends all over the country I can call, and so I never feel like I'm alone.
And I think for me, I felt a little bit alone for several years, and I wanted to get better, and I didn't know exactly how to do that. And for me, the AFA was that answer. Mm-hmm. It was that next step in my education per se. And I'm kind of one of those people that whatever it is that I'm doing, I dive into it. I'm obsessive to the point of being a problem. And And one of the things, like when I started and I was shoeing, I shod for you. I'll tell this story. So when I started shoeing, I was working for old Johnny Year Out, and I was broke. Like most days, I didn't know if I was going to have enough fuel to get home because I just didn't have enough money, man.
Right.
And you called me up and said, hey, can you come shoe a couple of horses for me at the clinic? And I think that was like one of the first times I'd shod in the valley down here. And I came down and I obsessed over it. It took me forever. And you'd come out, check on me every once in a while and looks good, nail it up. And I'd just obsess over it. I think I got one done. I didn't even get the other horse done. And you paid me for both of them. They said, you'll get the other horse another day. And I don't think I shod another horse for you for quite a while. I think it was a year or so before I ended up shoeing another one of your horses. But that little extra money that you paid me that day made a big difference.
That helped you out. Yeah. Well, good.
Well, and that's, I think, you understand that. You get the whole, you've done it with me, you've done it with others, the whole pay it forward, take a minute of your time to help somebody along.
Right.
And
yeah, we do a lot of mentoring in our profession too, and our clinic has been a long time what's called a preceptor clinic, where senior students, part of their education is to spend, I think they get 2 blocks their senior year, a month each, to go work with a practicing veterinarian. And where we're fairly close to WSU, we're a pretty popular place to go. And so for most of my career here in the Valley, we've had senior veterinary students working with us. And so it's
so that we never did get to that. So you worked for Lewiston Vet, which was
it was called a Macintosh Clinic. Initially. Then not long after I got there, they decided to change it to Lewiston Veterinary Clinic.
So you were at Lewiston Vet Clinic, and then eventually you ended up opening your own clinic.
Right. What happened was I got a call from a friend of mine who was on the faculty at the University of Idaho. They had what was called the Northwest Equine Reproduction Lab with Dr. Gordon Woods. And I'd gotten acquainted with him through the Idaho Vet Medical Association. And I was actually on the board. They had a board consisting of veterinarians and horsemen that we met a couple times a year and gave them advice on what direction we thought they should go with their research. And anyway, so I was pretty acquainted with them, and Dr. Woods called me one day and asked if I would like to go to work for him. He was starting a private company outside the university. This was not associated with the university. It was a private research company and dealing with equine reproduction. And they were going to get a bunch of stallions, and we're going to be collecting stallions and doing analysis on the semen. And anyway, I was getting a little burned out at Lewiston, and I decided to go ahead and jump on board with him. So I did that for a couple of years. It would have been in 2000, and I started the first of the year in the year 2000, and January 1st I started. And then the project that we were on ended about the middle of the year in 2001. So it was about a year and a half. But I saw that as a way to do something else and maybe find a new career in the research world. But it was very interesting. It was tough. It was it was a commute up to Moscow every day, and I was expected to be there by 4 in the morning.
Oh, geez.
So I had to leave here by 3 in the morning, and then it was long days, and it was we got Sundays off. Supposed to have Saturdays off, but we normally worked on Saturday too. So it was kind of a grueling year and a half.
Yeah.
But we did some good things, and one of the things that came out of it was the cloning project.
Oh, really?
The University of Idaho, and again, that was not what my job was, but when the cloning project was going on, it was pretty much all hands on deck for a week.
Right.
So he'd get everybody he could to help. And so I got it. And actually some of the results that we had from the research that we were doing paved the way for that to be successful.
Really?
So anyway, in 2001, we cloned the first equine embryo ever in the history of the world.
Really?
Right. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Was that also, I heard, I don't know, but I heard the story about the cloning of the mules.
That was it.
That
was the mules. There were 3 mules that were cloned.
I heard one was the devil, one wasn't so bad, and I think I can't remember what the third one was, but I heard they
were all okay, but they were all 3 different, even though they were basically identical genetically. They had different personalities.
Were they cloned in the recip mare was the same, or did they give them different mares?
They were different mares.
Do you think so? I mean, this is a question, and it's kind of funny because you like horses better than cows. If I was to make it,
I think that's probably
right. A fair statement.
That's a fair statement.
So
it isn't. I don't like cows, but horses are more of a challenge.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a difference between and I've watched you ride and we've ridden together. There's a difference between horsemen and riders, and I would say that you're a horseman. I've ridden with you enough that you. Well,
I would like to think so.
You spent enough practice at it.
I've had enough practice at it. Yeah, yeah.
But with it's my understanding that like 90% of a personality of a foal or a mule, for that matter, comes from the mare. The mare had a lot to, the old argument, nature over nurture. And the mare, I feel like, at least in my experience, has a lot to do with what the baby turns out to be.
Well, I think seeing those 3 mules would give credence to that argument that nurture does have something to do with it, because we had 3 animals that were genetically identical, and their personalities were all different.
Because I was reading a story about mules, and people always think that mules are stubborn and that they're kind of, and I found that a good mule, I'd take a good mule over a horse almost. I prefer to ride a horse personally, but a good mule is pretty hard to beat.
Yeah,
and I think your friend Jim Bunch would argue that there's nothing as good as a good mule.
Well, I know a lot of people that would make that argument.
I don't think
they're different, but mules are not quite as flighty in general. And
I've never seen a wire cut mule either. I haven't come across one in shoeing.
Well, I've seen in my career, I've seen quite a few wire cut mules. Oh yeah, well, but when they get tangled in wire, they're not as likely to panic as a horse, right. I would say. So they're I've seen some horrible wire cuts on mules and horses, both. But mules, I think, in general, are not going to hurt themselves as much as a horse will.
Well, and I know this for a fact. If they miss you when they kick, it was a warning. They don't miss a second time.
Oh, I don't know. There's a lot of mythology around mules.
Well, it's so years ago I was up in Weite, For everyone that doesn't know where Weippe is, you drive until you hear banjos and then just keep going a little further, and there'll be some kids from Deliverance out there on the porch, and
right.
hopefully no one from Weipe's listening to this thing. But anyway, I was up there and I was shoeing these pack strings, and they had like 3 or 4 mules on this pack string, and one was a 5-year-old, one was a 3-year-old, and one was like 10. And the owner told me, you don't have, if you can get the 5 and the 3-year-old, good, but if you can't, don't, it's no big deal. And back then I was still training horses, and I thought I was pretty freaking handy. So I got out my cotton rope, and I did the 5-year-old kind of fought me a little bit, and I half hitched his leg to his belly and let him stand for a minute, and he kind of shuffled around, and pretty soon he's standing like a champ. I get him trimmed up, and I get to the 3-year-old, and he starts into kind of balking and fighting me, and I thought, well, I'm not even going to mess with it. I'll just give you a little lesson. So I put a half hitch around his shoulder and hooked his leg up and stepped back, and I kid you not, that mule had his front feet over the top of the trailer he was tied to, and then went down and rolled all the way over and went straight back up in the air again. About 10 minutes go by. He stands there all calm, nice, and quiet, and I went up and trimmed all 4 feet.
He was just fine at that point.
Now, horses, I've had to tie up every leg on a horse, but mules, I found most of the time I just tie up one and they learn all 4.
Then they're good from then on, yeah.
But about 8 weeks later, I get a call, and he wants me to come up again, and it was one of those outfits that I saw like twice a year. I wouldn't actually shoe for him anymore because there's no money in it, but I was broke, so I went up there, and I get up there, and they're all standing tied, and I start working my way through them, and I get to the 3-year-old mule, and she goes, yeah, I said, why am I here at 8 weeks? Like, usually he tries to do his own thing, and she goes, well, that 3-year-old kicked him in the nose last week, and he's mad at him. And I said, what happened? She goes, well, he got to fighting with him or whatever, and the mule just nailed him right between the eyes. And so I started to get underneath that 3-year-old, and I went to pick up that leg, and he started his bullshit, and I thought, all right. And I walked over the truck, I pulled the rope out, and I set it on the tailgate. I didn't even walk over the mule. I just set it on the tailgate of the truck. And I swear to God, that mule looked over at the rope and just put his head down, and I trimmed all 4 feet like it was no big deal. But I've never seen a horse do that.
Yeah. Yeah, a horse would run off. You didn't even have him tied.
No, I had him tied. I had him tied. I'm not that big of a whisperer. I need some control.
Right.
But you're riding more now than you've probably ridden in years.
Well, I've got a little more time to ride now, so I've got some young horses that I'm getting started, and
that's pretty. I bet that feels.
It does. It does.
It's. I've watched you work on horses and get on horses that I was even going, I don't know if I'd get on that one.
Well, I'm getting a little smarter as I'm getting older. I'm not made out of rubber anymore at my age.
Because you've got a new stud, and you have a bunch of babies around town. I've been trimming a few of them, and they all look pretty badass. They're Palominos, a lot of them, because your stud's Palomino.
He's a Palomino, so he throws a lot of Palominos, right?
And you're showing on him.
Well, I'm a newbie in the show world. I've been to 3 or 4 shows, is all.
What are you do? Like, what kind of showing are you?
We're reining. He's a reiner. His name is KR Gunpowder, and he was the world champion reining paint horse in 2016.
Really?
And he's a pretty cool horse. He's very well trained.
I rode reiners. It's been 7 years. I was over in Portland. I was riding some reiners, and I was chasing a girl over there, and I chased a few, but she was really connected in the horse world over there, and I rode some they kept yelling at me to stop dragging them around like a colt. I didn't, because I was used to riding colts, so I was, big movements trying to get.
Right.
You just sit there with your hand. You pretty much barely make any movement at all to make them do stuff.
Once they're trained, it's pretty much all your weight in your legs.
It's just, isn't that crazy?
Yeah. They're very highly trained. They're neat
And do
horses.
you like the reining? Do you like?
I do. I got into cutting a few years ago, but the problem with cutting is you have to have cattle,
Right.
and with the reining, you can do pretty much the same maneuvers you do when you're cutting, except you don't need to have cattle.
Well, I had a client that she was fourth in. Well, you know her. You've worked on her horses, I think. Penny Harker.
Oh yes,
And she
was pretty involved in the cutting world.
I think she took fourth in the world for the year that she competed hardcore.
Right.
But she said the difference between reiners and cutters, and I mean I don't know, is that cutters work backwards. They're always almost in reverse. And reiners, you have some drive forward, and then they got cow reiner, working cow horse, something like that.
Yeah, the working cow horse. Yeah,
Have you done any?
That's a combination of the two. I've not done that, but it would.
That one looks interesting to me because it just like there's more going on.
It's cow work and reining, right?
Which is more kind of what we would do every day,
right?
And that's something because I mean when you were younger. The only way to work cows and stuff was on horseback. And I see a lot of guys now, they'll start a four-wheeler up, and I'd rather go get my horse. I mean, and I know they think four-wheelers are faster and whatnot, but I just think there's something about getting on a horse. And
there is. And then in the terrain that we have around here, four-wheelers don't work very well either. You can't go down into the steep canyons and rough country that we have around here on a four-wheeler.
No.
So there'll always be a need for good cow horses.
So when you opened your clinic, we kind of obviously got a little off. You opened your clinic. You had your original clinic that was in what we call the Clarkston Heights, and then you have a clinic that you bought down in kind of Bridge Street, Clarkston.
Yeah, when I first started out, when the project up at U of I, it wasn't the U of I, it was a private research group that I was in. But anyway, they ran out of money. We accomplished some good things. Among them was the technology that allowed the cloning to become successful through the U of I. But the money ran out, and I was let go in April of 2001, and I had to do something, so I moved back. Well, I didn't move. I've been commuting up there, but I just came back to the valley. I bought a vet truck and put the word out that I was available, and I started working out of my truck. And after a month of that, I realized that I was kind of spoiled. I kind of liked to have a clinic to work out of.
Right.
So I started looking around, and I found a barn up in the Clarkston Heights owned by Jim Bunch.
Right.
That I thought would work, and we did a little remodeling in there, put a cement floor in it, and a few things, and so I started Rustebakke Veterinary Service out of that little barn there, up in the Heights, and
this would have been late 2001.
That would have been in 2001. Yeah, we were going by the summer of 2001. We were going out of there, and I found that it was pretty successful. I was pretty busy from day one, and by the first year it was just me. I did it all by myself. And then by the second year, I started having to tell people I can't go on the call because I'm busy doing paperwork. And I thought, that doesn't make any sense, does it? So I hired I hired somebody that didn't work out, and then I hired another one that ended up being Sandra.
Really?
Whitaker, who ended up spending the next 20-some years with me.
Wow.
And so that was my first hire was my best hire.
Sandra, because when I met you, and I say this with no shame, she scares the shit out of me. But she is efficient, and I honestly think I don't know if you could do what you did without her. She was pretty amazing.
No, I don't think I could have. I was very blessed to have found her. I had a vet student working for me at the time. She was just working for the summer. And I realized that it was kind of nice to have a second person. And when she was getting ready to go, I said, I need to find somebody that's somewhere near as good as you to carry on. And she said, well, how about Sandra? And I said, no, I don't think Sandra's going to work because she's from Germany and she doesn't speak English very well yet. And Michelle says, no, I think you need to trust me and hire Sandra. And so I did, and that was the best decision I made.
It's crazy the people you meet, and like Sandra, I had no idea that she was there from basically the start of Rustebakke Vet Service.
Pretty much, yeah. She just worked part-time. She had a young child at home. Sammy was about a year old at the time, or maybe 2, and she didn't want to work full time. But we split the job between her and another gal by the name of Chris Case.
Oh, okay.
And after a year, Chris decided to. Well, she moved to Winchester, so she wasn't available. And by then, Sandra decided that she could do full-time.
You know, it's crazy how small the world is, because Chris Case went to our church up where I lived. And
really?
Yeah, and it's kind of fun.
You probably didn't know that, huh?
No, I did not know that she worked for you.
Really?
No.
Yeah.
Because we moved back. God, when did we move back? I want to say... Well, I was 13 when we moved to Craigmont, and I moved back here when I was 11 or 12, I think.
Uh-huh.
And so I don't know how many,
Well, she would have moved up there, I think, in probably 2002 or 3.
Yeah, so she was there before we were. We didn't move up there. We weren't up there until, if I was 13 when we moved up there, I'm going to be 30 in May, which would be... So 17 years, 17 years ago.
Yeah.
So that would be, that'd be 2007.
Yeah.
2006.
Yeah. So they were well established there by then. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then, so how long did you stay at Jim Bunch's place?
Okay. We were there. After I'd been there for 3 or 4 years, I realized that we were going to outgrow that place pretty quick. And so I started shopping around, and I found that little piece of property down on 15th Street in Clarkston. And I went ahead and I bought that, and that was probably in 2005 or 6, somewhere in there. And so I just bought it and was just sitting on it until the stars aligned right, and I thought we could make the move. And then in 2009, we built. We started building in September and moved in November of 2009.
Wow. And it's kind of a testament to the American dream a little bit. You know, you started as a small town, backwoods kid out of Montana, and here you are. I mean, you were for the rodeo this year, the Grand Marshal.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and I know that everybody in this, you've touched so many different people in the area. Like, I mean, my life would be very different if I hadn't met you. I think.
It's good of you to say that, Caleb.
I mean, it really is. I mean, it's really I realize that, my dad passed away several years ago, And I realized after talking to people that knew him, I didn't even know that they knew him. And you don't realize your impact, really. And you've had probably one of the most positive impacts. I mean, to be in business that long and have that kind of reputation, that is not an easy thing to do. I mean, not to make it, get all mushy around here and whatnot.
Right. Well, I mean, that's kind of what life is about is trying to make an impact and to do good things and to leave the world a better place than when you found it. And we can't affect the whole world, but we can affect the people that are around us.
Is because I was raised with the old idea that your word is your bond. What you say is what you do. You go to work. If you tell your boss you're going to be there at 7, by God, you be there at 7. Or
right.
If you're really good, you be there at 6:30. I was never that good of an employee. That's why I work for myself now. But I mean, I'm amazed at how many kids just don't show up to work. I mean, and owning your own business is even harder because no one tells you to go to work. You have to go.
I never really had any problem when you own it. The motivation is there to do it.
Right.
And we always opened at 8:00, and it was a rare day that I wasn't there before 7.
Right.
And we closed at 5. It was a rare day that I got out of there before 7 or 8.
I remember. What was it? This would have been Jim Bunch. He's gotten me into some trouble over the years. I love Jim, but every once in a while he'll say something, and I'm like, oh, it's going to be one of those days. we were, back then I wasn't. I wasn't dating anybody at the time, so I was a Friday night and I had not a thing to do, and it was like 6:30 or something. And I seen you were at the clinic, so I pulled in and he said to me, "You want to go see my new donkey?" Sure. And I didn't realize that go see the new donkey meant go collect the new donkey. And that was the biggest mess I've ever been. There, the donkey got loose and was running around the parking lot, and the mare was going every which way, and dust was flying. Jim was yelling. And
yeah, that was an adventure.
Yeah,
that was an adventure. I'd kind of forgotten about that, but when you talked about some of the weirdest thing that had happened, that probably should be in the top 10 list anyway.
It was definitely. And then it's just funny, and the large animal vets, you walk in and you've got one of them gloves on all the way up to the elbow or shoulder, and you've got horse shit or cow shit or whatever it happens to be, and usually it's all over you at some point. That kind of in my mind, that kind of dedication deserves some.
Yeah, you can't let a little shit get in the way of doing what you need to do. That's right.
Probably a life motto there, huh?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
With and then you retired, semi-retired a little bit. They keep calling you back.
They call me back when they get something they don't have enough staff to handle it or so on. And actually, I'm going to be going back at least 2 days a week for the foreseeable future until they find somebody else, because they lost one of the veterinarians that was there. And so I'm going to be back.
Well, I'm sure people will be excited, but to a certain extent, maybe, I don't know. Do you want to go back for that much time, or are you pretty happy with being able to ride your horse?
Well, I'm happy with having the extra time that I have now with retirement, but I'm okay with helping out.
All right.
I'm okay with helping out.
Well, it's hard. I can't imagine, because I'm kind of midway through my career. Hopefully it'll be a long career, but I can't imagine not doing it. I can imagine maybe someday not doing as much, but I can't imagine not doing it. That would be hard, I think.
And that's kind of the way I am too, because it's been my whole life for so long that to give it up totally is a little tough to do.
Well, I guess I was thinking of different things and different stories and the close calls that you've been through or whatever. A few years ago, you wrecked your pickup, and that I've been in the same. I think I've wrecked 2 or 3 trucks now. And you had I always miss when I go in there. I always miss because you had your little dog Lucy forever. I think you had her as long as I was. You had her when I met you. She was a lot younger back then. But.
Yeah, I had her for 15 years. She went everywhere with me. Yeah. Yep. She was my. I told people she was my driver. When I'd get sleepy, I'd let her drive. That's not exactly true, but then when I wrecked that time, that was Lucy's fault. I asked her to drive, and she said, "No, I'm too sleepy too." So she made me drive, and I shouldn't have done it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not running. You ran harder. You make most of us look lazy. I mean, I'm not exactly a slouch, but
no, you're not. You're a hard worker. But I was raised that way. We didn't work by the clock. We worked when the work was to be done, and that's just not the way it is anymore. There's a term that is used a lot in veterinary medicine now. It's called the work-life balance. And I was asked that. I was at a seminar up at WSU. I was asked to talk to a bunch of pre-vet kids, and they asked about work-life balance. And what I said was that that's 3 words that I never heard in the same sentence until just a few years ago. And but it's not a bad thing, There needs to be balance between your work and the rest of your life, and that's where the big emphasis is right now, and that's why you don't have veterinarians that are going out in the middle of the night and pulling calves, and the veterinary medicine has evolved, and in highly populated areas there are emergency clinics that will take care of your needs after hours. In the smaller communities, there are no emergency clinics. We're fortunate here in the Valley. We do have Washington State University, which is only about 45 minutes away, and they're available. And so in the Valley here, most of the veterinary clinics, after 5 o'clock, they hang up the phone, and if you have an emergency, you get to go to WSU. It didn't used to be that way, but
do you think your success, and I mean with everything, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if the work-life balance, obviously you have to find, do you want that lifestyle or do you want to go without? And I think the problem isn't a work-life balance. The problem is, my generation want all the time off, but all the success. And I don't think those two necessarily go together.
No, and I think you have to make a decision personally what it's going to be. If it's going to be the personal,
Right.
or the career.
Right.
And my generation was more inclined to go toward the career, and your generation is more inclined to go toward the personal part of it.
I would agree. I think the thing I see though that kind of concerns me in my own generation, and with some, even I would say some of my friends, is they will, okay, I want family, but really what it is an excuse to be lazy. You know, my dad, my dad was on the road a lot as a kid, and to a certain extent, I understand. I resented it a little bit as a kid, but I realized that the reason we were able to have food and things on our table and have, you know, what I would consider nice things and a nice life, we weren't, again, I say we weren't wealthy, but we weren't, in my mind, poor, was because he worked. And so I see a lot of young men specifically not providing for their family because in their mind it's about their work-life balance, which is just an excuse not to actually man up and do, in my opinion, do what they need to do.
Right. Yeah, I think that is definitely true.
Because you have two boys, you've provided for both of them, and Robbie I think's a hell of a nice guy, and you know, they turned out all right. I think Robbie turned out good. So
yeah,
and you work more than anybody I've ever known.
Yeah, but there's times that I should have been there for, you know, I did miss important events in their lives because I was busy taking care of a sick horse or a sick cow or something.
And I think it's hard, I think for especially yours, it's probably not a fair comparison because it's not like someone else who can go, well, I'll just take the day off and I just won't go into work today and somebody else will get the work or I'll catch it up Monday. You know, your work was literally in a lot of cases life or death. And if you didn't go, no one would.
Right. And we're still running into that at my clinic now. You know, we've got
Do you think owners have changed too? Like, do you think there's large animal, maybe not as much, but we don't understand life and death very good, I feel like, especially my generation. Like, I understood that, you know, we had cows and cows got ate and we took care of them and there was a circle of life per se, but I see more and more people that don't have that basic reality.
Well, we talked about that a little bit earlier, you know, the people that grow up in an urban environment and are not around animals and are not around that type of thing,
Right.
don't have they just don't have that sense.
Right. It's disappointing a little bit. I mean, I think it's, and you actually, I guess you see it now. A lot of people are trying to go back to that homesteading. You know, it used to be everybody moved to the city and now everybody's moving out to the country. And
right.
And it is kind of hilarious and I'm sure you see it too. You'll show up someplace and they've got every animal in old McDonald's farm out there and
right.
And no idea.
Right. We see some people from California that are moving to these abandoned farmsteads out in the middle of nowhere and they don't really have a clue, but they're giving it a try. And my hat's off to them.
Right.
You know, it's kind of fun.
What's the worst story? Like, you showed up and you're like, oh my God, this is going to be a mess, and it was.
Oh, I don't know if I could pick one, but I have gone out and it's been some person that has never had animals before, and they've got chickens and they've got goats and they've got a cow or two and they've got a horse and they sold the business in California, and they're multimillionaires. So they buy this little place out in the middle of nowhere, and they're gonna make their living off it.
It's crazy. I joke with him. I'll get in the driveway. I go, "You're from California, ain't you?"
Yeah.
I go, "How'd you know?" I said, "Well,
your license plate."
I said the 6 no trespassing signs coming up your driveway were kind of a dead giveaway." And
Yeah.
they go, "Well, why is that?" I said, "Well, in Idaho, if we can see it, we can shoot it, so we don't need a no trespassing sign."
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, in this area, you go. I mean, what's the farthest like you go? Like, I know you've gone up into Weippe, but you probably got.
I go to not very often, but I'll go to Riggins.
Oh, wow.
I've been to Coeur d'Alene, which is 100 miles to the north.
Wow.
Riggins is 100 miles to the south. Over to the Oregon border, that's only 60 miles. But
Wow. So, and then do you get up into headquarters at all?
I've not gone to headquarters. That's just past Weippe.
Yeah.
But Weipe's that's about 80 miles, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Somewhere in there, 80 or 90 miles.
It's not like a nice highway either. It's
No, it's not. No.
And in the winter,
Yeah.
in the winter, what's you driving? I mean, I've had some really close calls.
It can get a little hairy. Once December hits, I put chains in my truck. And a couple of years ago, I went for about a week or so, or maybe 2 weeks, when I put chains on every call.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's crazy because I know so many people. I've talked to them. And I go, "You got chains in the truck?" And they go, "No." And I'm like, "Why?" And you've gotten to her place. She lives up on the backside of Orofino. She had the horse that foundered. You went up there and took X-rays.
Okay. Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
The horse's name is Boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was up there, and I backed out of their driveway 2 winters ago, and the truck just started sliding off the.
That's a pretty hairy place to go.
Oh, and I finally I put it in drive because I was just sliding off. I was going to go off the edge.
Yeah.
And then I just turned the wheel and turned it downhill and swung the nose around until I hooked the ditch. And then chained up to get out of there.
Yeah. If you fall off the road, it's like 200 feet down.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a lot of our roads, because everything in this area is up. You go up to get to it or down to get to it.
Right. Yeah. We're in a hole right here.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's pretty sketchy.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, I really appreciate you coming on, Dave. Like I said, I was super excited. I've been excited about this all week.
All right. Well, I hope it turned out all right.
It'll be perfect. And we might do another one at some point, and we'll maybe do a few more stories about all the crazy things you've seen.
All right. One thing I might add here, you might splice it in earlier because it doesn't really fit at the end. But one thing I was thinking about is that I went on this call with there's a couple of instances where something really kind of weird happened. I should have mentioned that probably earlier, but I went out to. It was kind of like the John You're Out deal where this guy had about 50 brood mares, and he'd turn them out and just let them breed. And they were well-bred horses, but anyway, every year he'd have me come out and castrate colts, and it was about like it was at the Year Out place, except he did have a cattle chute. So we'd run them through the cattle chute and give them the drugs, run them out. They'd fall down, and we'd jump on them and go ahead and give them more drugs if needed, and then we'd castrate them. And we had about 12 or 15 of them to do that day. And about halfway through, this colt came through, and he said, I don't think we'll do this one. This is a pretty nice colt. I think we'll just let him be a stallion for now. And so, okay, we let him go. And the next morning, I get a call, and he said, you know, those colts you cut yesterday, one of them died last night. And my heart just sank, you know. I just felt that I must have, something went terribly wrong. I said, well, I'll come out and take a look at them. And so I went out, and this colt's laying there in the corral, and I lift his leg up and look back there, and it was the one I didn't cut.
That made you feel good, didn't it?
Oh man, I'll tell you what, that was a big relief.
Oh.
And I just got to thinking about that. And you know, if you look at enough horses, and I don't know what the number would be, but tomorrow one of them is going to be dead, regardless of if you do, whatever you do. And that was just his time to go. He was just a yearling, and he died for no reason, no reason. We don't know why he died.
I think it was, well, you know him. He was one of your classmates. He had the horse. He's the guy that did the Coggins test. And
Scott.
Yeah, Scott. And he was telling me one day that the rule in the medical world is that treat them before they get better. He said, what was it? He said, 20% won't get any better no matter what you do. He had a whole percentage. Yeah,
what it is, and that's kind of, you know, I think in human medicine they'll tell you the same thing, that 80% get better regardless of what you do. They're going to get better on their own. 10% are going to crash whatever you do. And then there's the other 10% that you can make a difference.
and to a certain extent, I guess you got a 90% chance that.
Right. Without doing a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
It's crazy that horseshoeing's the same. I've done that a few times with horseshoeing. You know, you get that phone call, my horse is lame, and you don't know why. Like, you did the best you could when you were there.
Yeah. And
you did the best with what you know how to do.
Right.
And as I've gotten better.
This is a horse that you've already shod.
Yeah.
You go out and show him, and 3 days later he's lame.
And it could be something that's completely outside of your control. He walked out, stepped on a rock. You know, I had one this spring that broke a coffin bone.
You take 100 horses, well, let's say 500, that are all sound today. Tomorrow, one of them is going to be lame.
Right.
And he stepped on a rock. He got an abscess. It's hard to say what. But if you happen to have been the guy that shod that one horse that was going to be lame tomorrow, then you get blamed for it. And it's the same in vet medicine.
Well, it's and I think that's, you know, one of the things that I always, and I'll tell this story. Another time that you had my back, I won't tell whose horse it was. I shod the horse, and I thought everything was fine. Well, what had happened was when this was 4 or 5 years ago, I drove a nail, and I didn't realize I had it spun around the wrong way.
Oh, yeah.
And I caught it, and I was like, and I pulled it out, and he didn't really react. So I was like, no big deal. So I got a nail, turned it around, drove it right. On the road he went. And about, I'd say 3-4 days later,
you get the call.
He went to you. He was really lame. And abscesses are the worst. They're the best because they're quick
get
fix.
better. They're a quick fix. Yep.
But they're the worst because the owner calls you and the horse is 3-legged. Looks like you broke something, you know. And I walked into the clinic and I said, "What do you think was wrong?" And you walked me away from the client and you said, "Hey, I think you stuck that horse." He says, "But I didn't tell her. She's a little higher maintenance, but I didn't tell her. So,
yeah.
So just next time, don't stick him."
Yeah, right. Well, I always tell the client when that happens that there's not a farrier out there that hasn't made that mistake. So don't fire the farrier just because of that.
If you haven't hot nailed one, you haven't drove enough nails.
No, you haven't. No.
Who else? Somebody used to say it's a long way from their heart.
It is.
And the idea is never to hurt one, but and you're working on like I did a podcast, probably 2 months ago with a cow hoof trimmer.
Uh-huh.
And he came down the barn and was watching me shoe a horse, and he goes, "Oh my God, I'd never do that." Because they're in a chute, the legs are held perfectly still.
Oh yeah, it eliminates a lot of the.
Same with you. You're like talking about out in the pasture with the cow. Like you're in an uncontrolled environment doing the best that you can.
Right.
You know.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
But I thank you, Dave. It's been the best. This has been a lot of fun.
Well, it's been fun for me too, and thank you for the opportunity to do it.
All right. We'll catch you all next time.
All right.